On the surface, Alice in Wonderland seems like a work of pure fantasy. You might even call it the perfect children's story. The truth, however, is that it's something else entirely. We think we know it, but what we remember is a dream. A whimsical surface that hides something far more profound and deeply human. Beneath the mad tea parties lies a coded biography, a monument built from the pieces of a shattered friendship between a mathematician named Charles Dodgson and his muse, a little girl named Alice Little. By the end of this investigation, you won't just know the story of Alice. You'll understand the profound and lifelong tragedy that bound the real girl to the fictional Wonderland forever. Close your eyes and think of Wonderland. What do you see? I'm sure it's the same shared cultural dream we all have. You see a frantic white rabbit obsessively checking his pocket watch, forever late for some mysterious appointment. You see the Cheshire Cat, whose body fades away until only its unnerving philosophical grin remains hanging in the air. You undoubtedly see the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, a chaotic celebration of nonsense where it's always 6 o'clock. What's the one image from Wonderland that has always stuck with you? For generations, we've accepted this as a universal classic celebrating childhood imagination over adult absurdity. It feels like it was written for everyone, but that's where the story we think we know begins to fall apart. Because this whimsical, nonsensical world wasn't created for millions. It wasn't written for you or for me. It was a private universe, built exclusively for one person, a 10-year-old girl named Alice Little. The entire epic began as a simple spoken tale, invented on the spot by Charles Dodgson to entertain Alice and her sisters during a boat trip on a golden afternoon, July 4th, 1862. It was Alice herself who fell so in love with the story that she begged him to write it down for her. A simple request that would ignite a literary phenomenon and irrevocably change both of their lives. But the story is filled with a strange sadness that makes no sense in a children's tale. The first clues to the real-life tragedy lie not in history, but in the fabric of Wonderland itself. And the key that unlocks it all is realizing that Wonderland wasn't a playground for Alice. It was a cage. Our first clue comes from the disconnect between the two Alices. The real Alice Liddell was a force of nature, confident, stubborn, and an active collaborator in creating the fantasy world. But the Alice we meet in the book is a starkly different character. Fictional Alice is often passive, confused, and profoundly lost. She is constantly being lectured and corrected by the creatures she meets, trying desperately to make sense of illogical rules being imposed upon her by an absurd and unsympathetic world. She isn't a creator of the world. She is a victim of its whims. This was a deliberate choice. I believe Dodgson wasn't just writing about Alice. He was writing to her. In the pages of his manuscript, he could capture a perfect, idealized version of his muse. A girl frozen in time at the perfect age of innocent curiosity, before the complexities of the world could change her. He was creating a literary photograph, preserving her just as he liked to preserve her in his famous portraits. And if you believe these kinds of hidden histories are also worth preserving, you know exactly what to do with that subscribe button. The character on the page is less a reflection of the real Alice Little, and more a monument to Dodgson's idea of her. In fact, years later, Dodgson would defensively claim that his character was entirely imaginary and had no connection to any real child. This statement feels less like a clarification and more like a psychological defense. The first sign of a desperate attachment to an idealized past, he would build an entire fantasy world to protect. But this desperate need to freeze a perfect moment in time is only the first layer. It doesn't explain the story's profound, lingering sadness, and it certainly doesn't explain the sudden, violent end to their real-world friendship. The answer to that lies buried in the historical record, specifically in the pages that were deliberately ripped out of a private diary. And I promise you, we are going to get to that. The second clue is woven into the very mechanics of Wonderland, a deep, pervasive anxiety about the relentless passage of time. Think about the first character Alice follows down the rabbit hole. It's the White Rabbit, and his defining characteristic is his obsession with being late. His pocket watch isn't just an accessory, It's a symbol of constant nagging panic. He is a slave to a schedule we never understand, a physical manifestation of the terror of time moving forward. But the most powerful example, of course, is the Mad Hatter. He isn't just eccentric, he is a man literally trapped in a single moment. As he explains to Alice, he quarreled with time last March, and as a punishment, it is now perpetually 6 o'clock, forever tea time. His world is frozen, caught in an endless loop from which he can never escape. This might sound like whimsical nonsense, but in reality, it's a direct reflection of Charles Dodgson's own profound melancholy. We know from his diaries and letters that he built his emotional world almost exclusively around his friendships with young girls. He found adult company difficult, but with children, his stammer would disappear as he became a brilliant storyteller. But these friendships had a built-in tragedy. The girls would inevitably grow up, leaving the world of childhood and him behind. Wonderland's desperate, anxious obsession with stopping the clock is Dodgson's own obsession projected onto a fantasy world. The story is a deeply personal, almost desperate attempt to create one golden afternoon, as he calls it in the book's prefatory poem, that never has to end. It's an attempt to stop time itself. This brings us to our third and most revealing textual clue, the true nature of Alice's journey. From the moment she lands at the bottom of the rabbit hole, Alice has one primary, overriding goal. She wants to get into the beautiful, manicured garden she sees through a tiny door. The garden is described as a place of perfect beauty, filled with beds of bright flowers and cool fountains. It is a clear and powerful symbol of an idyllic paradise, a representation of perfect, protected childhood, a kind of Eden. Yet, throughout the entire first part of her adventure, every attempt she makes to enter this garden is viciously thwarted. The door is too small. When she finds the key, she's too big. When she drinks the potion to shrink, she forgets the key. When she eats the cake to grow, she becomes a giant trapped in the house. You might think this is just a story about the challenges of growing up, but it goes much deeper. In a normal story about growing up, Alice would eventually learn the rules and earn her way into the garden, symbolizing a successful transition. But that's pointedly not what happens here. The book portrays the process of maturation not as a natural journey, but as a frustrating, sad, and ultimately tragic process of losing access to a state of perfect innocence. The garden is a world she can see, a world she desperately wants, but a world she can never, ever reach. This framing reveals the story's true, melancholic heart. It's a narrative that mirrors the real-life, abrupt end of the intense friendship between Charles Dodgson and Alice Liddell, a moment when the door to the garden of her childhood was suddenly and permanently slammed shut. To understand what really happened, we have to leave the fictional world behind and step into the rigid, rule-bound world of Victorian Oxford. Here we find Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, a brilliant but awkward man of logic and routine who struggled to relate to his peers. Yet, in the company of children, this shy, stammering academic would transform. He became Lewis Carroll, a master of nonsense, a weaver of fantastical tales, and a gifted amateur photographer. And his favorite subjects were the children of the new dean of Christ Church, Henry Liddell. The Liddell family occupied a much higher social sphere. As daughters of the powerful dean of Christ Church, Alice and her sisters were groomed for high society. Yet for several years, the bachelor mathematician became a fixture in their lives. The record shows a near-constant stream of boat trips on the river, picnics in the countryside, elaborate storytelling sessions, and, crucially, photography. Dodgson was a pioneer in the art of portrait photography, and over half of his entire surviving portfolio consists of images of young girls, with Alice Liddell being his undisputed favorite subject. To our modern sensibilities, the intensity of this focus can be unsettling. But in the Victorian era, the concept of childhood innocence was idealized, and such friendships, while perhaps unusual, were not immediately seen as sinister. They existed in a gray area of social acceptability, an area that would soon prove to be treacherous ground. Their friendship, this magical collaboration that produced one of the world's most enduring stories, came to a sudden and brutal end in June of 1863. For months, Dodgson's personal diary is filled with entries detailing his time with the little children. He saw them almost daily. He was a part of their world, and they were the center of his. Then, complete silence. After a visit to the Littles on June 27th, all contact abruptly ceased. For nearly 6 months, there is not a single mention of him visiting the deanery or spending time with the children. The constant stream of companionship had been severed at its source. The silence is finally broken in his diary entry for December of that year. He notes seeing the Little family at a party and writes that he held aloof from them as they seemed to do from me. Something serious had happened, causing the formidable Mrs. Liddell to permanently sever his access to her daughters. The friendship was over. This sudden break is the central mystery of his life, a real-world tragedy that echoes through the story's themes of locked doors. The golden afternoon was over. This is the central mystery. A friendship severed without explanation. For decades, historians could only speculate as to why. But the real proof of the tragedy is not found in what was written down, but in what was physically and deliberately erased from history. So, what happened? For decades, biographers could only speculate. But the most powerful clue we have is not found in what was written down, but in what was deliberately erased from history. After Charles Dodgson's death, his diary was passed down through his family. And at some point, his niece, Manella Dodgson, took a pair of scissors or a blade and physically cut out the pages covering the exact period of the rift, June 27th, 28th, and 29th, 1863. An entire section deliberately removed from history. What could have been so scandalous that it had to be completely erased? This is the historical smoking gun. This is the moment our investigation pivots from speculation to near certainty. You don't censor a record of uneventful days. You don't erase memories of pleasant boat trips. This act of censorship is a glaring admission that something happened during those 3 days that was considered so sensitive, so potentially scandalous, that the family felt the need to destroy the evidence forever. This single act proves that the rift wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crisis. For years, the prevailing theory, based on a single, later destroyed note, was that Dodgson had proposed, or planned to propose, marriage to the 11-year-old Alice Little. While shocking to us, a long engagement to a child was not entirely unheard of in the Victorian era, though it would have been highly improper for a man of Dodgson's lower social standing to propose to the daughter of the dean. Other modern scholars suggest the issue may have involved rumors about his photography, or his relationships with Alice's older sister, or the family governess. Ultimately, we don't need to know the exact reason. The censorship is proof enough. A catastrophe occurred that was so profound, it had to be buried. The story of Wonderland was over for Charles Dodgson, but for Alice Little, it was just beginning. She grew up dutifully following the path laid out for her. She married a wealthy man named Reginald Hargreaves and became a society hostess, the mother of 3 sons. But she could never escape the shadow of the fictional girl who shared her name. Being the real Alice was reportedly something she found to be a heavy burden, a constant reminder of a childhood and a friendship that had ended in mysterious and painful circumstances. The whimsical world that had been her private kingdom became a public spectacle from which she could not escape. I have to pause and ask because it's a fascinating question. For those of you who have followed the lives of real people immortalized in famous art or stories, do you think it's ultimately a blessing or a curse? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Then, real-world tragedy struck. 2 of her 3 sons were killed in the First World War. The immense grief shattered her husband. After his death, Alice, now an elderly widow, found herself in dire financial straits. With great reluctance, she was forced to make a heartbreaking decision. She put the original priceless manuscript that Dodgson had painstakingly written just for her up for auction at Sotheby's. The sale of this deeply personal gift, This tangible piece of her lost childhood fetched a massive sum, equivalent to over £1 million today. It's a moment of profound tragedy. The magical key to her past had to be sold simply to secure her future. There is one final, haunting piece of evidence that perfectly captures the end of this story. Years after the rift, when Alice was 18 years old, her mother, Mrs. Little, brought her back to Charles Dodgson's studio one last time. The presumed reason was to have formal portraits taken to help attract a suitable husband, a final transactional use for the photographer who had once been a cherished friend. Dodgson agreed. The resulting image is one of the most famous he ever took, and it is a masterpiece of quiet melancholy. Gone is the playful, mischievous, and engaged little girl from his earlier portraits. In her place sits a young woman who looks profoundly uncomfortable. Her gaze is downcast, her posture is stiff, and there is an unmistakable distance, a sadness in her eyes. This final photograph serves as the perfect, heartbreaking bookend to their story. All the shared imagination had evaporated, leaving only a quiet, powerful testament to a lost paradise, a portrait of a door that could never truly be reopened. This act of embedding a secret, real-world tragedy into a children's story was not unique to Lewis Carroll. In fact, many of the seemingly innocent nursery rhymes we teach our children hide equally dark and violent histories. A simple rhyme we all know, about a boy and a girl falling down a hill, seems to be about clumsiness. In truth, it's a coded message, a political satire hiding the bloody chaos and royal scandal of the French Revolution. To uncover the incredible true story behind Jack and Jill, click the video on screen now.